Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. We are just a day away from the Texas legislature getting together with a lot of tough issues to face. Seems like we say that every time the Texas legislature gets together. A lot of tough issues that they're going to face. And joining us right now, getting us ready for the upcoming legislative session, and we'll be visiting with him throughout the session and beyond, the editor of the Quorum Report, which you can read at quorumreport.com. It's Scott Braddock. Scott, welcome back. How are you today?
Morning, Chad. I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing great. Today, we learned about how much money state lawmakers will have in the upcoming budget, correct?
Yeah, and you mentioned tough choices and lawmakers sometimes fighting with each other. To make it very relatable, whenever a husband and wife fight about money, is it ever because there's too much of it?
No.
Right. So what the comptroller this morning did was what he does right before the beginning of every legislative session, is he tells the lawmakers one of the most significant pieces of information they're going to have, which is how much money they have to spend over the next 24 months, over the biennium. And he's actually projecting, despite the fact that oil is down below 50, and there was some Twitter traffic about this last night. I had a particularly active weekend on Twitter. I'm not sure why that happened, but anyway,
that happens.
It sometimes, and you know this from doing the radio show. Sometimes you think you have the best topic ever, and nobody calls in. Sometimes you make an offhand comment, and everyone in the world calls in to complain about whatever you just said.
Exactly.
But when it comes to the revenue estimate here, I was maybe thinking the number would be lower because the price of oil is lower. It's under 50, but the Texas economy is just smoking apparently, over the last year or so. And so the comptroller, Glenn Hager, is projecting $119 billion in general state revenue for the lawmakers to spend, which is up from 2 years ago, quite a bit actually. Last time it was $104.9 billion that he initially laid out, and he revised that number as the lawmakers were going about doing their work. He revised it up because the economy was doing well. So while the rest of the country seems to have a pretty good economy. Wall Street is down, of course, and the price of oil is down. But we have a pretty good, economic outlook here. Unemployment is at record lows, historic lows in Texas. And the comptroller wants to be conservative here, of course, and he doesn't want them to just, go break the bank with how much they spend. But he also noted that, as we talked about last week, the Economic Stabilization Fund, the Rainy Day Fund, is going to look pretty good as well. A lot of folks had thought that the total there was going to be about $12 billion coming into this cycle, coming into this budget writing cycle for the legislature. It's going to be more like $15 billion dollars in the Economic Stabilization Fund. So they have big decisions to make, like you said, and it looks like they've got quite a bit of cash on hand to make those decisions. But as we've talked about here, it's still a Republican-led legislature, a conservative legislature, and so you'll have some of the Democrats sort of acting like the mommy who wants to spend more of it, and the Republicans acting like the daddy who says we have to be a little more prudent here.
But are any of them going to say we don't want to spend that $119 billion?
Well,
and that they're going to want to stick to the 104 like we had in the last, are they going to say, let's send all that money back?
Well, and the real challenge is in Texas, of course, that because of the way our tax structure is set up, when they have money in the bank, there's really no way to send it back to the people. And so what we may see happen, there was a lot of chatter about this over the last week or so, what we may see is some of that money spent from the Economic Stabilization Fund to try to buy down property taxes, to try to contain how much you're paying, even though this is one of the things that got my Twitter really going this weekend. I pointed out there is no proposal right now at the Texas Capitol to decrease your property taxes for any homeowner or any business. All of the proposals, of course, are just to sort of rein in local government when we're talking about the ISDs, the counties, the cities. There are proposals, just like there were before, which failed in the last legislative session, to cap how much revenue can go up, that those local jurisdictions are collecting. But yeah, I mean, this is, again, it's a conservative legislature, and they're going to work to, not spend any more money than what's there. And of course, by by the law, by the Constitution, they do have to do that. They have to have a balanced budget.
If, and we're visiting with the editor of Quorum Report, Scott Braddock, off the top of your head, when they see this figure come out from Glenn Hager, $119 billion,
mm-hmm.
what's going to be the first, I guess, area that pops up and says, well, we're going to need some more of that money? Is it going to be education funding, which the new presumed House Speaker Bonnen says he wants to look at that. He wants to look at education funding. Is it property tax caps? What's going to be the first group that says, hey, we need the money over here?
It's absolutely going to be public education. That is the priority for the incoming or presumptive speaker. By the way, the Speaker of the House will be elected tomorrow, and we all expect it to be Dennis Bonnen. When he was asked at an event in East Texas what his top priorities are, and we talked about this last week, he said it's property taxes, and property taxes, which that and school funding go hand in hand because of the way that we finance our schools. The retiring Speaker, Joe Strauss, has said that if you really want to reduce people's property taxes, then what you need to do is completely rebuild the way that we pay for schools in Texas. But there doesn't seem, at least yet, to be any proposal to add a new revenue stream to replace and backfill what the school districts would lose if some of this stuff ends up playing out the way we expect at the Capitol. If you look at what the governor is talking about with 2.5% tax caps locally, it's possible that you could need as much as $30 billion over a decade to make up the money just to keep us kind of where we're at as far as, how we pay for public schools and how much money they're getting. So tough choices. I think you framed it up exactly right. This session is going to be focused a lot on those things. And the other thing is you have to remember, right now the lawmakers are not under the threat of any court. There's no court ruling that says that the way that we pay for schools is illegal. The state Supreme Court, the last time this went all the way up the food chain in the courts, the state Supreme Court said that the way, I'm paraphrasing, but others have said this, the way we pay for schools is awful but lawful. And in the past, whenever the lawmakers have not had some threat, sort of a judicial gun to their head, to have to do something about school finance, they just don't get around to it. So we'll see if they actually do make any of those tough decisions.
Scott, do you mind holding over for one more segment?
Sounds good to me.
All right, we're going to place you on hold. When we come back, we're going to get into the differences between a Speaker Bonnen from Speaker Strauss, and we'll try to get to some other news as well with Scott Braddock from the Quorum Report here on the Chad Hasty Show. Chad Hasty Show News Talk, KFYO. Joining us on the phones once again, the editor of Quorum Report, Scott Braddock. And Scott, you've got you brought up that tomorrow is when we will have officially a new Speaker of the Texas House. That does look to be Dennis Bonnen. And in fact, it came out, I think, last week that Representative Dustin Burrows here in Lubbock is going to be one of those giving a nominating speech for Dennis Bonnen, which is probably a good sign for Dustin Burrows, I would think, moving forward.
So.
What would something like that mean for the future of someone like a Representative Burrows, and then also go further than that and kind of compare and contrast what we will see with a Speaker Bonnen compared to what we saw with a Speaker Strauss?
Yeah, let me start with Burrows because that's what's local here in Lubbock. You have a representative who was, as I have called it, sort of in on the Sunday night shenanigans when the lawmakers were coming together in a private meeting to figure out who they wanted to support for Speaker. This was a couple months ago. And the name they came up with was Dennis Bonnen, who has been a leader in the Texas House. He's been the Ways and Means chairman. He's chaired some other committees. He was Speaker pro tem under Joe Strauss. So he is somebody who's a Strauss lieutenant. Make no mistake about that. I think there are some lawmakers who wanted to see something dramatically different from the leadership of Speaker Strauss. You have the Freedom Caucus out there, who, I think were their main organizing principle was to be against Strauss on most things. You have Democrats who were probably pretty frustrated with Speaker Strauss toward the end of last session when the Sanctuary Cities bill was making its way through the legislative process and a few other things. But keep in mind, every member of the Texas House in 2017 voted for Speaker Strauss. So
right.
they supported this person, and this is the way it always goes. When you have a boss, you're not always happy with them, right? And the Speaker of the House can either sort of act as a boss, which I think Joe Strauss was doing toward the end of the last legislative session, but he, for the most part, let the House be the House and let the members support what they wanted to support. Bonnen is close to Dustin Burrows. I think that it's interesting that Burrows and, as a Republican, I think you'll see some, at least one or two Democrats in the mix tomorrow in the nominating speech process. It's an honor, and it also means that the person who's being nominated wants that person to speak for them. It's as simple as that. It's not like they just get sort of, randomly chosen, as you allude to. I think for Bonnen, the contrast with Strauss is that while Strauss is somebody who, quite honestly, could have a sort of boring leadership style, not exactly charismatic, not hot-headed, he's very even-handed and level-headed. Bonnen is somebody who's been more of a flamethrower, somebody who's been sort of the bad cop to Strauss's good cop. And so when Bonnen ascends to the speakership, it may be interesting to see who sort of acts as his good cop. We'll be, looking to see, who's the more sort of diplomatic person. I think Strauss is more diplomatic in his dealings with the lieutenant governor, and Bonnen was more of an attack dog when it came to dealing with the lieutenant governor. And so, going forward, the leadership team that Bonnen puts together will be very telling. It'll be in the next few weeks, and we won't have an exact date on this yet, Chad, as far as when committee assignments come out. That will also help answer your question about Burrows and other folks from West Texas and all the lawmakers from around the state as far as where they, where they sit on the chessboard moving forward in the legislative process. The speaker, it's at their whim when they decide to release committee assignments. Then we figure out who are the point people for important issues. Who's the person who's going to lead the House effort on property taxes. That'll be the Ways and Means chairman, whoever that is. And it can't be Bonnen again because he'll be speaker, presumptively. And then you have issues like the budget overall. We figure out who the appropriations chairman is going to be, health care, environment, natural resources, oil and gas, that sort of stuff. When you start to see who's in those leadership spots, that's when you know who's going to be making these decisions.
Yeah. Let's switch over to the Senate side of things real quickly. There has been a little bit of movement as far as chairmanships on the Senate side.
Well, you had a scandal-plagued senator last week. This is Charles Schwertner, a Republican from the Austin area, from Williamson County, who has been accused by a grad student at the University of Texas of sending an inappropriate photo. And UT did an investigation that this senator did not cooperate with. It's important to point out he wasn't accused of anything illegal, but certainly something that was inappropriate. It's my understanding that Senate Republican women were particularly upset behind the scenes with what had been alleged here, and that at least they perceived that there was not any consequence for him just yet. It did come out late last week that Senator Schwertner, who has been the chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate, which is a powerful committee, he is no longer going to be the chairman. He released a letter saying that he and the lieutenant governor had discussed the situation, and imagine this, Chad, Senator Schwertner needs to spend more time with his family, and so he's stepping down. So who's going to get that chairmanship? There's some speculation about, and you can always look for the self-interest. Some speculation that one of those Republican women will take that slot. Maybe Senator Lois Kolkhorst, Republican from Brenham, and then we'll see what happens with the other chairmanships. Out in West Texas, you have Senator Kel Seliger, who's chairman of higher education, which of course is very important with everything going on at Texas Tech and all that. Is he going to retain his chairmanship? Not sure. I think some folks might say Schwertner is losing his chairmanship, when he's accused of something. What happens to the guy who hasn't been accused of anything but did displease the lieutenant governor who makes those decisions about chairmanships? You had Senator Seliger, who fought vigorously against what the lieutenant governor wanted to do on a couple of things, in particular school vouchers, in the last legislative session.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. About when do we expect those to be released?
It's my understanding it's going to happen later this week, but just like with the speaker, that's at the pleasure of the lieutenant governor whenever he'd like to do that. It's my understanding it's going to happen probably on Thursday.
Very nice. Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. Tell folks what Quorum Report is and how they can access it.
It's the real insider scoop on what's happening at the Texas Legislature. QuorumReport.com. Sign up for the free emails, and we'll get you hooked in. Thanks, Chad.
All right, Scott Braddock, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Talk soon.
All righty, we'll talk with you again next week. That's Scott Braddock, the editor of Quorum Report. You can view the website at QuorumReport.com.